I'm sure that most of you are already familiar with the idea that there is a veil that separates the physical reality from the spiritual reality, and that is absolutely true. But it is often interpreted as a very mystical and mysterious thing, as though it is some real barrier that our consciousness must pass through in order to experience the spiritual planes of existence. But the veil is merely a mental barrier. It is simply the vibrational and structural variance between the self as it knows itself while embodied within the electrical system of the human body, and the self as it knows itself while embodied within the living light. I want to share what happens each night as we fall asleep, because it's not like our consciousness ceases to exist except for some vague electrical activity in our brain. We actually leave our bodies. Our consciousness departs from the nervous system of the human body, embodies itself within the living light, and goes off and explores many other systems of reality, except that it must pass through this veil, which is the vibrational and structural variance between the two states of being, and thus memory is not shared between the two states of consciousness. Allow me to explain in greater detail, but first I would like for you to take a moment and familiarize yourself with this diagram. It is a graphical representation of how our brainwave states relate to our perception of reality. Physical reality is experienced within the beta and alpha brainwave range, and spiritual reality is experienced from within the theta brainwave range. However, most people do not currently have waking consciousness within the theta brainwave state, and thus all that they experience of the spiritual reality is what is able to filter through their consciousness as dreams. Each night as we relax our mind to fall asleep, there is a natural gravity that pulls our consciousness down out of the beta and alpha range and into the theta brainwave state where multidimensional spiritual reality is experienced. The problem, though, is that we must pass through this veil, which is the vibrational and structural variance between the two states of consciousness. And the variance is so vast that as we shift from one state to the other, we black out or lose consciousness as we pass through the veil. Thus, our waking consciousness is not brought into the multidimensional spiritual state. And the same thing happens when we return to our bodies. We still must pass through this veil, and thus our multidimensional spiritual consciousness is not brought into the normal waking state. Memory is not shared between the two states of being, and thus we remain ignorant of our true and divine nature and all that we do from outside of our bodies.